Well, good afternoon, everyone. Well, first of all, let me thank all of you who have taken the time to come hear this presentation. I think you'll find it informative, and I have a few opening remarks I'm going to make, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Turley to go through the nitty-gritty details of next year's budget. Before I get started on that, I also want to welcome all those who are not able to be here in person, but who are joining us via the web. We were just looking before we got started, and we had over 200 hits on the web to watch the event. So glad to see so many people are interested, and I hope we're able to give you some information to work from so you understand where we think we're headed financially for next year. So let me make a few general comments, kind of set the stage of what we're looking at. I know some of you have heard this before, so bear with me on the bits and pieces, but I think it puts everything in perspective. I want to remind you, first of all, we've been working real hard the last few years to really solidify Jefferson College's financial position, and we have done a great job. We have built up our reserves to a very healthy level, and that's very important in these times when you're not sure where state funding is going to be, when you don't know where some of your different funding sources are headed, where tuition might go, where student enrollment might go. A lot of questions are out there, and our reserves give us a lot of opportunity to face those answers without a lot of worry. Second of all, just again to compliment budget managers, because over the last couple of years we've done a great job of making sure that we've held the line on costs. That's not only helped us build the reserves, but certainly helped us be a more efficient operation. Excuse me. Not always what we will like to think of, but in these times, particularly with public accountability, it's not only the right thing to do, but it shows good public stewardship, and I think we reap benefits from there. So having said that, we headed into this year not sure where we're going to land financially, and I'm going to say that this year's budget has probably got more moving parts still moving than any other budget I've worked on, and part of that has to do with the state government process, but part of it also has to do with our enrollment situation. So we have a lot of questions that we're still working on to get final answers. So what you'll see today is where we think we're going to be. It's going to be the information we're going to present to the board as far as a set of budget assumptions. But I don't know that it will be the last discussion we have on these topics, and I'm not sure it's the final landing place for every line item. A couple of things just to remind you. We started this year off with the governor's State of the State address, where he outlined his thoughts for the state budget. In that budget, he recommended a 12.5% cut for higher education, which was a pretty substantial cut for all of us. A couple of months later, after that announcement and a lot of gnashing of teeth and concern across the state, the governor did come up with about $40 million from the mortgage fund settlement that he was able to put back toward higher education, and that reduced our cuts to 8%. For Jefferson College, that's still $600,000, $650,000 easily. Still a substantial cut out of state funding alone. We've been working across the state with House and Senate leaders who were very concerned about these cuts for higher education. They're big supporters not only of Jefferson College, but of the whole community college system. So the House passed a budget bill that included flat funding for higher education, which was kind of welcome news. And while we were glad to see it, we were very concerned because some of the funding sources that they were using were controversial. They were using money that was originally dedicated toward Medicaid for the blind, and then when that didn't work, they were looking at the K through 12 system. Well, that doesn't go over well with our educational neighbors, and now we're talking a lot about lottery money and things like that. So the sources of the funding, where the money would come from to support our flat funding, was in question. It got over to the Senate, and the Senate said, we don't really want to hash this out too much. We too believe that higher education needs to be reasonably well funded. They left it at zero. So the budget that we expect to land on the governor's desk, which statutorily has to be there by Friday, we expect will have a 0% decrease for higher education. Does that mean we're going to get all that money? That's our question. But we've been wrestling with that all along. We think that it's a better shot now that we'll get more money than we've ever thought before. And I guess the good news there is that, like I said, we have a lot of friends in the legislature who value what we do, and that's really important. That's not going to prevent the governor from possibly doing a budget veto. I don't expect that, but it could happen. Or more likely that we could see a budget withhold sometime during the next fiscal year. And Rick will talk a little bit about that possibly along the way. So just as we're relishing that good news and what that meant for us, we really started paying attention to our enrollment numbers. And if you haven't watched those closely, or if you're not, looking at that day to day, the numbers are a little scary. Our pre-enrollment, and again, it's year to year, so this is compared to where we were this time last year, had us off as much as 15-16% in our enrollment being decreased. We're now at about 13% overall decrease. That's still a substantial number, and we're not completely sure we understand the reason why. We know some of the reasons, but we don't know the full reason. We do know that we expect that number to decrease because we have a lot of students who have taken the Compass test. We know we have a lot of applications out there where students have not followed up with enrollment. So we're fairly optimistic that the 13% decrease that we're seeing right now, and this is for both summer and fall, the numbers are pretty comparable, probably won't stand, but we don't know where it's going to land. Again, what does that mean for us? Well, a 15% decrease in enrollment, reduces our cash flow by a little over $1 million. It's a substantial budget impact. So that's what we've been wrestling with and trying to decide what we wanted to believe and where that would put us financially has been a little bit of a struggle. But I think we've come up with the basis or the platform, if you will, for a good solid budget. The budget is balanced as we have it so far, but it is balanced with about $750,000 coming out of that reserve fund I talked about. That's what it's there for. We built that reserve so we could use it on a rainy day. Figuratively speaking, it's raining outside. We need to pull some of that money out. But we don't want to take more money from that if we can help it, because there will probably be other rainy days down the road. So it's been a challenge so far, but I'm going to ask Dr. Turley to come up, talk to you a little bit about the budget assumptions, let you see the numbers that I'm talking about in detail, and then of course we hope we'll have some time for questions as time goes on and see if we can't give you a better budget picture. So with that, Rick, I'm turning it over to you.
How many of you have been through this 5 times before, 2 times before, 3 times before? This isn't much different than what we saw at the President's Council 2 months ago, I guess it was, except we've updated it a little bit with some of the new numbers. The end result, as you'll see, is the bottom line still looks very similar because the adjustments have been made. State revenue has gone up and tuition revenue has gone down because of the enrollment decrease. So we're still fighting some very strange variables out there that we don't have a good handle on. But as time goes on, we're going to work a little closer with those and find out exactly where that is. So we're probably going to do this again sometime in about maybe 4 to 6 weeks. And if we can't get it set up at this kind of meeting with all the faculty out for the summer, we may just do it through the web, and then we'll know exactly where it's going to be before the final Board of Trustees adoption of the budget. This information you've seen before. We've always got to respond to the HLC and any federal state accountability issues. Student needs, obviously, we have to take care of what our students need as far as classroom space, physical space, appropriate instruction, and as much as we can to accommodate everything that they would want to have. New programs, we've got allied health programs coming online. We've got some new CIS programming coming online, and I'm sure there'll be others as we move forward and time changes, but we've got to always be aware of those and be able to accommodate it. The biggest change, I think, this year is we haven't really had to deal with declining enrollment for a long time, and maybe ever. Yeah, it's the first time since I've been here, I think, that enrollment's actually declining, and that's 13 years almost. So it's not that it wasn't anticipated. I think what wasn't anticipated is the level of the decline that seems to be happening right now. It's a little faster than what we anticipated, but apparently we're not alone. Nationwide, there's some big numbers in community colleges on enrollment declines in other places and around the state. So it's not just us. Sustainability, we've talked about that because there's been a number of questions as we do start new programs. What do we do and how do we plan on making sure that we can sustain those going forward? We've got to always have that in mind. And the way we do that is to try to build business models on those programs and anticipate the enrollment and make sure we charge enough in fees and tuition on those specialized type programs to cover those ongoing costs. enrollment in those programs is a variable. We never know exactly what they'll be until they are. So, it sounds trite, but that's how we have to deal with them. And if it doesn't work that way, then we have to go back and reevaluate our assumptions, our conditions, and the business model, and see what we have to do to tweak it, change it, or throw it away completely and start over. But you always have to have that flexibility. What have we done for considerations this year? Tax revenue has been relatively flat. We did have a little slug of money that came through on a protest this year. It was a couple of years in the making. I think it was on railroad and utility taxes that helped push us over the top a little bit this year, but that won't happen next year. It's not out there to happen, but flat looks like what it will be in the near term. State aid declined last year. We were anticipating the big reduction this year. That appears that it will not happen, but there's still a big unknown with that, as Ray discussed. We don't know what the governor's going to do. He's always been friendly to community colleges, so our hope is that he'll let that ride and not exercise any type of veto power over higher education this time. So we expect it to remain level. The board did adopt that $2 tuition increase, and they've also approved up to $5 for next year. If you were present at any of those discussions with the board, they're lukewarm about that $5 tuition increase. They don't want to raise the tuition for students if they could at all avoid it. And you can't blame them for that. But under these conditions, I think they understand that we may well have to do that, and we may well have to go more than that unless conditions change. We added on a technology fee of $3 a credit hour. This only applies to those credit courses that are not online. I probably should state it a different way. The online courses are not affected, so it's not uniform across all of the credit hours, but we do have a new technology fee. And we have increased some of our lab fees to help accommodate some of the new costs in the programs, things like welding rods and metal and things like that. And those courses, we have to adjust those up to try to cover the cost of those materials, and some of the other labs that we have to have consumables, and those costs go up, so we adjust those fees. We always try to make sure we tie that to a cost where we can make sense of that for students if they ever ask the question. Enrollment decline. I think you've heard enough about that already, but right now fall stands down at 13%. Summer looks like it's going to come in down 9%, somewhere in that range. It's not going to go more than 1% or 2% out of the way for summer. Fall, there's still some variables out there that we really don't know how they're going to affect it. Is Julie here? Are the number of admissions applications, they're up. Yeah. So there's something in play here that we think is going to bring that down from 13%, which is kind of why we've backed it down to an 8% decline. And hopefully I'm not being too optimistic. That's why we're going to roll this out. In about 6 weeks, we'll take another look at that and see if that's caught up. And I'll show you how we make those day-to-day projections. I've even incorporated some of you in on those future mailings. You'll see these enrollment statistics as they compare today's date to the same date last year for a particular term. So that's the best information we have on credit hours. The financial position, Ray talked about that. We've built a very strong reserve so we can weather a storm. It's just a matter of how long can we weather it without plugging the gaps in revenue, and that can't go on for very many years before something has to change, and you have to start to unwind what you've done and take a hard look at the things that are central to the mission and the things that may not be. And, those decisions may or may not have to happen, but it appears that at least we're going to have to think about them in the next year or so. The two buckets, this was at the end of fiscal 11. That was the distribution between what's unrestricted and what's restricted. Restricted are things like Perkins, Viking Woods, all of the federally funded projects are all restricted. They can only be used for a certain purpose, so we can't do anything else with that money. And the reason I carved those off is the revenue and the income, or the expenses rather, always match, at least closely, so that there are zero-sum options. So primarily what we deal with is the unrestricted side for our budget discussion. The three-legged stool, I've even modernized this a little bit. You can see the The center one is tuition, and the years we're looking at here is, the oldest year is 2004-05, and then I put it in for 2010 and 2011. And obviously you can see how much tuition, which is the center bar here, has become the majority of our revenue stream. Good and bad. It's good when enrollment's climbing, it's bad when enrollment's declining because it affects your bottom line much quicker. As Ray stated in the past, I think we're more state located than state supported anymore. At some point they're going to have to put their money where their mouth is, or higher education and education in general is going to continue to suffer. I can't speak politically to that very well, but I think everybody that works here would know that that's the case. But how do you get that translated out into the community at large is a difficult proposition. But they do need to pick up the pace. This is, if I even had 10-year ago numbers, these are all less than we were in 1999 by a fairly significant amount in actual dollars, not adjusted for inflation. So the state is contributing less now in real actual dollars than they were 12 years ago. Any questions about those? We hope to build a fourth leg on this still somehow, some way, and that's kind of over on the restricted side. If we can bring in outside funding or find other ways to generate funds to help pay for some of the operation, that helps to build that fourth leg. And that we've done a little of that, then there's probably a lot more room to go, but we've got to build our infrastructure and get it in place to make sure that we can handle it once we get it. So that's a big issue. Enrollment. The red columns are all actuals based on our census information. The oldest one is 06. Fiscal 11 was 136,397 credit hours. The guess for this year, based on what we've seen, about 133,669. It looks like that's going to be somewhat close. And then an 8% decline takes us down to 122,976. If I had a yardstick, I'd lay it across there, and I think we talked about this before. If you take a trend line, historically, we're coming back toward the trend. We had the big increase over those years. You have to anticipate at some point it's going to come back to it and down to the trend line. So if that's the case, I've run some graphs on this in my office. Within a year or two, it should be back on that trend line, but there's some other variables out there we have to be aware of. The high school age population is declining. So if we're going to do anything about it, it's got to be done in a segment that's not just high school. It's got to be that non-traditional student we've talked about. It's got to be a number of, however we can find ways to generate credit hours that are not based on high school graduates, not just high school graduates, which is a big part of what we have. We are way, our average age here is much lower than it is nationally at a community college level. So we're geared toward the younger population, so at some point we may have to, I know we're going to try to drive that into the non-traditional population. Julie's working on that now, and I know a number of folks here are, so hopefully that'll help the cause. This is, I probably can't read this, but this is the report that we get every day. This is fall, and the day comparison is today, May 10th to May 9th. We are down, this shows us down 13%, and there's a number of ways that data is cut up. It's by what type of student they are, whether they're a new freshman, other freshmen, returning, continuing, transfer, dual credit, what their major is or declared major. And there's a second page of this that has the location on it. I didn't copy it and put it on here, but you know, we slice and dice the information in any way that we can think of to try to come up with some rational way of looking at enrollment, but this is the best thing we've gotten so far. It's every day we get this. So I think Scott and a couple of folks on the faculty team for negotiation, I've put them on the mailing list so you can see it every day. So this is not secret information. This is how we make decisions. All right, build on the past. As Ray said, we built up a fairly nice reserve. I think that is somewhere around the $7 million mark at the end of fiscal 11, which is right at the 22%, 23% range of unrestricted funds, which is a healthy reserve. It's you get below 15%, you probably start to squirm a little bit. So we've got a little room before we get there, and we've got enough to buy us time until we can unwind ourselves from the increase that we had in enrollment and get back down to a size operation that matches what the enrollment is, and that'll take a little while. Budget reserves, we planned on using it, and we're going to use it. As Ray said, it'll show up in these numbers here in a minute, about $750,000 this year. We're really not sure what's going on with the state. There are indications that state revenue is starting to rise, and if that's the case, we may get a reprieve from any more cuts or threats of cuts for a year or two. But there's a lot of rumbling out there about a double-dip recession, so if that happens, all bets are off. But hopefully we're through that for a while and it's not going to happen. Enrollment decline, one of our main strategic ideas for this next fiscal year, or the upcoming year when we go through the action planning process, is how do we unwind ourselves from the enrollment levels where we are now, or how do we get enrollment back up to these levels so we can maintain the same size operation. Primarily this affects adjunct instructors, in those type of funding. But it's hard to get that ratcheted back down to the same level. When we get to that, I'll show you a little of that, but I've projected a $100,000 decline in adjunct costs for next year. But if I use an analog year that has the same enrollment, there should be $200,000, even adjusted for the changes in cost for the hourly rate for adjunct. We just can't seem to unwind ourselves as fast as we need to get back and settle that back down. But it'll happen, just because you don't have enough sections or students to generate the hours for adjunct instruction. So that'll happen. The new plan programs, I don't think there's anything new that we don't already know, except for Rad Tech will be coming online, but we knew about that last year. Is there anything else that we've got? Reading initiative started this last year. I don't think we got anything else quite ready to go yet, so anybody correct me on that. I haven't heard of anything yet. There's a few things lying out there in the action plans that are small items, but they're not full-blown instructional programs. I think there was a fine arts degree that was being discussed at some point, but I don't think anything's come forward on that yet. All right, revenue changes. Last time we talked about this, we had a big negative number there for state aid. We backed that down to zero. Taxes just basically flat, but about $135,000 out of $8 million is flat, so not much increase. There's a $2 tuition increase. This number, the 240, ATS enrollment, there's a new program there. I shouldn't have forgotten. It's called Project Lead the Way. Is Brandon here? That's going to generate some new credit hours down the ATS for this fall. That starts up in fall. The technology fees and lab increases about $329,000. Here comes the big enrollment issue. 8%, somewhere around the $1,038,000 range with that much loss in enrollment. So you can see if we start hanging up there around that 13%, that's a much bigger number that we may have to deal with. It could be in the $1,005,000, $1,008,000 range. Health program revenues. There's a couple of startup programs. They're going to think RT, is it started? Lisa's program started. And there's a couple others that will probably come online sometime this next fiscal year, and that'll add some of our revenue. Some of the other revenues, just we're expecting some decline in the bookstore revenue is going to decline because of the enrollment decline. There may be some of those kinds of corollary revenues that we're going to lose, but it's not significant. And this big thing, don't let that bother you. There are a number of things that are coming. The state has decided that we're not going to have those in their restricted funds anymore. They're going to become part of our core. So they're moving from restricted over to unrestricted. So it's a dollar for dollar trade-off, revenue and expense-wise. We're just moving it from restricted over to unrestricted. But I wanted to make sure that, that it's in here that we have recognition that that's going to take place, because it is a sizable number, but it's just moving inside the budget. And then the last item there is the $750,000 we're going to pull out of reserves to help balance the budget. How's that all add up? Well, we've got to have this side first. The things, can you see this stuff that's in red? Okay. Whenever things start getting uncertain, those are the things that we start to look at. You know, where do we go to start recovering some costs? But as of right now, they're all still in. Anything that's a positive number up here is an additional cost. Anything in brackets is a savings. Oh, let's go down the list. Medical insurance premiums, we've booked a $50,000 increase just because we took that at mid-year this year, so we got 6 months at a 5% increase, and that's about what that is. With the new self-funded program, I think there's a very good possibility that we're going to stay stable in our health and medical insurance premiums for at least another year, maybe longer. And there may be some other benefits that we get out of that as time goes on too that may be cost savings. Pay raises, we've still got a 2% across the board raise. Here you see it's in red because without knowing where that enrollment's going to go and what happens with state funding, we can't make a final decision on that probably until census time in September. And we don't know how we're going to deal with that, but we'll find, if everything comes in the way we expect, we'll find a way to get that through. We know the issues with that. We'd love to be able to do more than that, but there's not very many places that we can really dig into the operating budget and get significant numbers. Adjunct pay raises, we booked another $5 per credit hour because they get to try to keep that adjunct pay coming up so we're not at a disadvantage with some of our other community colleges in the area. I think St. Louis Community College and St. Charles are a little higher than we are still, but everybody loves us so much we can get away with it. Not for very long. Promotions and reclassifications, that's just the normal stuff that, that we go through a review of job positions. The faculty have their promotion and rank system that they go through the different levels, so that we have to have a number in the budget to cover those changes that happen. Utilities and insurance, there's always something that drives that up, and we think we're getting a good handle on this number, and as time goes on we may be able to back that down too. All this new equipment you see going up and all of the revised heating and air conditioning systems, it's going to have a significant impact on that number. It's just a matter until we find out how that's going to really play out over the course of another summer. New initiatives, that's through the action planning process. We just block off about $100,000, put that in the president's contingency account, and then as we develop those and finalize what those are going to be, we draw the money out of there and use those for new initiatives. It's in red because that's something we can not do if we want, if we need to stop something. New positions, there's a whole list of those that we review, and there's a number of positions I know are already going through the processes are going to be appointed, but there's a couple I think that we can at least defer or delay the hiring of those positions until we see what's going to happen with all this. There's a grants coordinator position in our office that we're going to defer until past census date at least, and if it looks like it's not going to happen, we just won't fill it. And it's, Richard and I will keep doing the work, but that's not good for everybody that's involved in them, I don't think. But information technology consulting, keep some money in there for the outside resources for information technology. We still got work to do there to get our systems completely modernized and up to date, and hopefully we can get some of the new data requirements handled through some reporting improvements, and that's worked out very well for us, but it's just a matter of time before we try to work our way back from the consulting and put the money back into employees, but I don't think we'll ever get away from IT consulting completely because it changes so quickly. There's the big line for our tech. Again, this is just the other side of that, and all those transfers from restricted over to unrestricted. And there's athletic housing scholarships. I know this makes people's hair stand up sometimes, but there's a request from the board that we restore some of the athletic housing scholarships, and that's what that number is, $35,000. We've reduced it by a total of 70, and this puts 35 back in. And whether that stays or not, that's another one of those floating variables. Probably going to have some more discussion at the board level. Other savings, and there are just a number of things that we've pulled from general institutional expenses, and some of that is utilities that we talked about a little while ago. Some of it's our property and casualty insurance. There's some maintenance service agreements that we've honed in on the IT service contracts and managed to pull out about $75,000 in there. And any place that we find it that's not directly related to instruction or payroll, we look for places to find them. We found about that much to work with. And then adjunct savings, there's $100,000 there. If we wind down to the level of enrollment, our credit hour enrollment that we had in 2009, which is that was the last year where we're going to be about the same level of enrollment, we should be somewhere around the same level of adjunct cost, adjusted for their increases. And that would be $200,000. So we got $100,000 to go there to get that back in line. And it may take us a little while to unwind that. That's the difficult part of it. But we're working on it. And then ERIP, last year we did the big early retirement program. It was a big cost the first year, and then every year after that there was savings. This is the first year where we're going to pick up about $140,000 in payroll savings over what we had before. Questions on any of those things? This is really high-level stuff. As we go through this budget, we go through this line item by line item by line item and look for anything that looks like an anomaly or someplace that, if money hasn't been spent for 5 years, we'll either call somebody and question it, or we'll just change the line because obviously it's not being used, we'll change it. But usually we call if there's a big issue. All right, strategic. We talk about this all the time, but our strategic thinking is going to be as much on how to cope with declining enrollment and declining revenue as it is going to be about new things and changing things. So we're going to have, that is just as strategic as anything that we do. So we're going to keep it all in mind because we want to make those improvements that help us move forward, and at the same time we've got to figure out ways to stay within our means. We're not ready to even talk about this yet. Richard and I do a 3-year projection, and we're not anywhere near that. In about 6 weeks, we'll do that 3-year projection so we can see where it'll all wind up over about a 3-year period. This we did before we knew about the state changes and the enrollment decline. So I think in the aggregate, it's probably pretty good, but I wouldn't want to put it out for publication now. Any questions? I saw when you were asleep. Anybody else fall asleep? Okay.
Well, as Rick said, that's where we are now. We are still in good shape. This budget that we're going forward is still balanced. We are still trying to keep, probably the biggest question I get is about a potential pay raise. Still trying to keep that in the budget. We are watching enrollment numbers very, very closely, and we're watching our state government very closely. And as those variables solidify, then we'll have a clear idea of when these numbers become concrete. But you get a sense of where we're trying to go with it. One thing Rick didn't spend a lot of time on, but we still, are still trying to address some of our strategic initiatives, and those we can't get to now, trying to figure out when we can get to them. We don't want to lose sight of those. That's our future. We've got to figure out where we want to be and what's it going to take to get there. And the budget should start reflecting more of those strategic initiatives over the next couple of years. So, that's really where we are. Like I said, there's nothing to be ashamed or embarrassed about. We're in good financial shape. We're not shuttering the doors. We're not closing up operations. But these variables like enrollment and the work of our state government really do affect how we operate here. So there's sure no other questions, because Rick's meeting doesn't start for another 20 minutes. So he's looking for something to kill time. Oh, okay. Well, again, let me thank you for taking the time and showing the interest. I know this may not be your first or primary interest of what we do here at the college, but I think it's really important that everybody be aware where we are and how the things that we do on a daily basis affect the big picture. So I really appreciate you taking the time. And if you have any questions that come up along the way, feel free to email us, call us. We'll be glad to give you the best information we can. And then, as Rick said, we will keep you updated. This is the information we'll present to the board next week, but it may change by the time we get to the board meeting in June for budget passage. We'll watch that closely. So thank you, everybody.